Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Sid, for that very kind introduction and for all the good work that you and Boeing do and the excellence of defence industry here in Australia, represented not only by Boeing but quite a number of other industry representatives here this evening. Hey, could I just commend the young guns of ASPI for putting the black tie in the black tie. Well done. And thank you very much, Peter Jennings, for the invitation to speak this evening. I'd like to also acknowledge the Honourable Dr. Brendan Nelson, the Director of the Australian War Memorial, my colleagues, Air Marshal Leo Davies, Chief of Air Force, Dr. Alex Zielinski, the Head of Defence Science and Technology Group, the Honourable Dr. Mike Kelly, MP, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening, and thank you for coming along to listen to a humble Chief of Army. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we are meeting this evening, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. I do really appreciate Peter and the ASPI team for the invitation to speak, also for these sort of informal opportunities for our broad national security community to gather and to discuss issues of strategic importance. These meetings are invaluable. They aid and add to the work that ASPI does more broadly every day. This evening, I will outline how the Army is delivering the land force to play our part in the defence of Australia and its national interests, what we intend to do in the future and why. Let me start, though, with the why. Context matters. It bounds and shapes our thinking and our decisions. An important context for any Chief of Service to understand is where we are in what I'll term the defence circle of life. In the early months of my first 2 years, the policy settings of the 2016 Defence White Paper were largely and thoroughly litigated. Alongside the White Paper came the Defence First Principles Review, implementation of the One Defence Initiative, and the renewal of the Defence Strategy Framework. Now, I thoroughly support the direction of these documents. It was then and it remains a season to deliver, no longer to debate. By mid-2015, the Australian Army was also entering an unprecedented 16th year of operational activity, globally, regionally, and at home. The performance of our people on these operations has been overwhelmingly professional and impressive, sometimes coming at great cost to physical and psychological well-being. The work to address this legacy of war is a national effort, and I greatly appreciate the continued attention it receives from many good and committed people. Thank you. Concurrently, the Army had initiated a number of organisational reforms in these recent decades. These initiatives began in the late 1990s with what was known as the Army in the 21st Century Initiative and the restructuring of the Army Trial. They marked the start of over 15 years of Army reform. The evolving threat of terrorism drove the first contemporary Army organisational reform with the raising of Special Operations Command in 2003. Over the next 12 years, Army embarked upon 4 more significant enterprise-level reforms. Their names, familiar to many in this room, were the Hardened and Networked Army 2006, the Enhanced Land Force 2007, the Adaptive Army 2008, and Plan Beersheba 2011. Supporting all of these plans were well-researched concept papers brimming with excellent ideas, dealing with issues such as manoeuvre operations in the littoral environment, complex warfighting, and adaptive campaigning. The ideas at the core of these initiatives remain vitally important to Army's future. They effectively form the design of the Army in being, the design endorsed by government. But big ideas are only as valuable as the effort made to deliver them, delivered through hard work over long years of consistent effort. As I recently stated at ASPI's Joint Integration Conference, we haven't always been as focused on delivery as we need to be, and much of this design agenda remains unfinished. To give you a sense of this, Peter Lay started the thinking about the hardened and networked army 15 years ago, yet we are still not a networked army today. We have spent the last 2 years very deliberately trying to progress the delivery of that army design. With plenty of newly minted defence policy and an incomplete army design, it has been a season to consolidate and deliver. Jack Welch, the iconic CEO of General Electric, captures my thinking when he said, in real life, strategy is actually very straightforward. You pick a general direction and implement the hell out of it. We are implementing the hell out of it. I set 4 framework priorities to focus thinking, planning and action. These were, and they are, support to operations. This is why our army exists. Assisting our wounded, injured and ill to rebuild capability and respect sacrifice. Modernise the force to give our people the best opportunity to achieve their missions and come home safely. And ongoing cultural reform and renewal to ensure our army reflects the highest expectations of the nation we serve. These priorities can be summed up under the rubric of people, readiness and modernisation. Unsurprisingly, these are a common preoccupation of my counterparts in the other armies with whom we have relationships. Giving specificity to these priorities, I directed Army senior leaders to 10 lines of effort, a few examples of which I wish to highlight this evening. In the people space, efforts to improve recruiting are clearly bearing fruit for both full and part-time organisations. The personnel numbers are very strong. We are essentially full, and that's where we want to be. Increasing the number of women in the army is a task that you hear a lot about, and it's driven by a capability need. Quite simply, we cannot be the best possible army if we are not getting our fair share of the human talent our nation offers. Women representing over 50% of that talent pool, and we aren't getting that number. We won't ever get 50%, but we have steadily been attracting more women. This is an ongoing low-key journey, but an unstoppable one. We've also been working on and seen a dramatic increase in our recruitment of Indigenous Australians. As the chief of one mob of Australians, I welcome citizens from every mob to serve as they have with honour, albeit not always with recognition, since Federation. Some question whether quality, toughness or competence suffers by this so-called social engineering of the force. I vehemently disagree both with that term and with the suggestion it doesn't strengthen the force. Give me a citizen and the best training system in the country, if not the planet, will make that person a soldier, a teammate and a leader every time. You may also have noticed Army has been active in highlighting family and domestic violence. The ill-disciplined use of violence domestically is criminal, while the ill-disciplined use of violence on operations is a war crime. One begets the other, neither is tolerable. The appropriate legal, ethical and disciplined use of violence is a core skill for soldiers. Domestic violence is the antithesis of this discipline. Addressing domestic violence is specifically about the effectiveness of our capability, and it's the right thing to do. Professional military education is another focus area. The US historian Williamson Murray highlights why this is important now and always. War, he says, is neither a science nor a craft, but rather an incredibly complex endeavour which challenges men and women to the core of their souls. It is, to put it bluntly, not only the most physically demanding of all professions, but also the most demanding intellectually and morally. The cost of slovenly thinking at every level of war can translate into the deaths of innumerable men and women, most of whom deserve better from their leaders. We simply cannot afford slovenly thinking. We are addressing this through the development and maintenance of a world-class professional military education system. Implementation of last year's Ryan Review has started us on this path. There is more good work to come. To advance readiness, we've been adjusting our force posture to support these significant new capabilities in the White Paper to be introduced into the Army. We've also been addressing the introduction of amphibious capability and competence into the Army, with Exercise Talisman Sabre a significant demonstration of what we have achieved and how far we have to go. I'd also like to note the renewal of our Special Operations capability to ensure it remains at the leading edge of global military effects. In the modernisation area, we're driving forward the development of our digital combat system. This is a quarter-century-long effort, 15 years underway thus far, moving from an analogue army to a digital-by-design force. It is grindingly hard work at the core of sustaining a joint land effect on the modern battlefield. And in doing so, we're trying to take ASPI's description of our third-generation Australian Army and move it a long way forward. Our armoured manoeuvre capability, our headquarters and our soldiers will all be sensor decision shooter nodes on this combat system. It must be resilient, it must be secure, and it must be effective, connected to our colleagues in Air Force and Navy and coalition partners. Moving forward, much of the next 2 years will look like more of the same. I am determined we'll be an army that delivers. But we can walk and chew gum at the same time. As the season turns over coming years, policy settings from the 2016 White Paper will be realised or come under review in light of changing circumstances. We've already begun to think, collaborate and consult to build and contribute robust ideas for the further development of a joint and integrated ADF and its army. Ideas for next week, for next year, and for the next White Paper. Our method will be one of questioning, thinking, innovating, influencing, partnering, and doing. In doing so, we need to take the long view. While the strategic circumstances described in the White Paper are still palpable today, some say the drivers of change described in the paper are accelerating. I'm not yet convinced. Time will tell. Let me give you some examples. Last month, former CDF Admiral Chris Barry was quoted in newspapers saying, "What I see are a lot of larger scale movements that remind me a lot of the lead up to war in 1914. And I agree with Professor Clark from Cambridge when he writes in The Sleepwalkers about the leaders just falling into the Great War scenario." The lead-in sentence to this article was equally challenging. It said, former Defence Force Chief Chris Barry says the world is on a countdown to war and a complacent Australia will not be ready for it. Let me be clear, I do not see any complacency in our national security leadership. But Admiral Barry is not alone in his concerns. The World Economic Forum publishes the Global Risk Report annually. The forum's head of geopolitical affairs, Epson Barth Eade, writing about the 2016 report, said, "While a concerted effort to properly address current trends, without a concerted effort to properly address current trends, the world is at risk of sleepwalking into a future of widening chaos with growing danger of interstate conflict." Concern about a more dangerous world is global. Henry Kissinger said in November last year, "The world is in chaos. Fundamental upheavals are occurring in many parts of the world simultaneously, most of which are governed by disparate principles. We are therefore faced with two problems. First, how to reduce global chaos regionally. Second, how to create a coherent world order based on agreed upon principles that are necessary for the operation of the entire system. Recent testimony by US Secretary of Defence Jim Mattis to the House Armed Services Committee brings the focus tighter and closer to Australia. He said, "The most dangerous and urgent threat to peace and security is North Korea. North Korea's continued pursuit of nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them has increased in pace and scope. The regime's nuclear weapons program is a clear and present danger to all. And the regime's provocative actions, manifestly illegal under international law, have not abated despite United Nations censure and sanctions." Secretary Mattis is a direct-speaking man who chooses his words carefully. While committee testimony is in part about messaging and resourcing, he clearly means what he says. Mattis further stated that he saw a more volatile security environment than any I have experienced during my 4 decades of military service. Building on this, Alan Dupont was quoted last week saying Australia faced more pronounced danger than any time since the Second World War. "In 40 years, I have never seen so much strategic volatility and instability globally and including our region. Superpowers ensured that none of the regional conflicts got out of hand. That is changing now. As we transition from the old world order to a new one, the contours of which we can only dimly see." So, how did we get here? It was not that long ago we had Francis Fukuyama's End of History and the Last Man, an account of which Sir Lawrence Freedman described earlier this year as the triumph of the liberal order in the latter half of the 20th century. Freedman believes promotion of liberal norms by the West met too many counter-examples and disappointments. These gradually eroded the liberal model and its aspirations, bringing world order to its current questionable state. He concludes, "We may just be at one of those inflection points in history, not because of a dramatic event, but because of an important shift in attitude." Here in Australia, respected journalist Paul Kelly speaks of the tribulations of a West divided over the challenge to its values, moral order, its security, how to halt the decline of middle-class prosperity, and ultimately, how to sustain the ethics of liberalism and conservatism, ideas that made the West successful and underwrote its political system to the benefit of all. Kelly dismisses the idea Australia can remain immune from what he calls the malaise affecting the great democracies. The possibility Freedman and Kelly are describing is one in which both political decision-making and predictable decision-making get harder. If true, it has the potential to make the strategic calculus of nations far less assured and more prone to miscalculation. Eminent professionals, politicians, strategists, journalists, military leader, are all saying there may be serious problems ahead. These are strategically important problems. Whether these experts are ultimately right or wrong, each has earned the right to be heard and considered. There is, of course, an alternative or qualifying perspective. The one I offer tonight comes from Alan Gingell. Speaking at last week's Crawford Leadership Forum, he observed, "It is the conceit of every generation that the time they live in is uniquely fluid and uncertain. We should be alert but not alarmed. And that's not what you get from a lot of the commentary that's out there." Alan's wisdom and measured judgment is reassuring. And there are men and women of good intent hard at work all across the globe seeking to make it so. But Alan and other reassuring voices can occasionally be wrong. As the Chief of Army, I have to think about the consequences of what occasionally wrong looks like. Which is to say, I work with my colleagues to advise government and build for Australia a modern and ready land force. a component of a joint force. Our Army and the ADF will always be relatively modest in size. The Army will always operate as a component of the ADF, and the ADF will always operate as a component of the Australian national effort, a national effort that historically has always been part of a coalition. The logic of this is irrefutable. It is the only way we can generate sufficient strategic weight for the most pressing of problems. Following the white paper lead, Army is focused on engagement with partners, on our people, and on the readiness and modernisation of the force. As we face the future, we will not be alone. Our allies, partners and friends will be there. The Army is first and foremost a people force. By engaging internationally, we enhance capability, sustain Australia's influence, generate security partnerships, and enhance security resilience within our region. We train for joint coalition warfighting. Exercise Talisman Sabre is an exemplar. The focus on warfighting is important. While we can always adjust down to meet simpler tasks, we cannot quickly and easily adjust up to meet our ultimate responsibilities to the nation. Key to our success in the future will be the considerable intellectual talent Army possesses. There is a vibrant and exciting debate and discourse about tactical, operational and strategic issues and ideas and concepts occurring right now among our people. This is something I strongly encourage. Most of this professional discourse is not happening in old schoolhouses or traditional Army venues, nor is it centred on our senior leaders, although they are involved. This vibrant and informative debate is happening among our young soldiers and officers, our digital natives. It is happening in the spaces of the information age, on blogs, digital forums, and in the Twitter sphere. We need to embrace a digitally savvy workforce and the potential it offers. The people who will win the important fights of the 21st century are not those who've been mastering and mastered the processes and concepts of the last century, or even of today. They are the people who will be able to look into the intense competition already occurring in the world and in future wars and see things in them we cannot see. We need people to think in new ways and see new chances, who seize opportunities to innovate and create winning edges. To Peter and ASPI, thank you for this opportunity to talk about the work of the Australian Army, work which is ongoing quietly in every corner of the country and across the globe. We are delivering today and planning for tomorrow as part of one national defence team. Success in this disruptive world will require an army of high-quality people, equipment and ideas. I'm quietly confident, but there is much to do. The last 2 years have flown by and no chief ever believes the job is done. Tomorrow and each day we start anew, building the best army we can for Australia. Thank you.